Live from the Pioneer PBS studios in Granite Falls, it's Meet the Candidates. This candidate forum is designed to inform you, the viewing public, about the candidates running for Minnesota state office in our region. Meet the Candidates is brought to you by the members of Pioneer PBS. This program features the candidates for Minnesota Senate District 22. And now your moderator for tonight's program, Jim Thureen.
Hello, welcome to Meet the Candidates. As Don noted, I'm Jim Thureen. This Pioneer PBS presentation is intended to inform you about the candidates who seek election or re-election to the Minnesota Legislature. This segment features candidates who are on the ballot in Senate District 22. They are incumbent Republican Senator Bill Weber and his challenger DFL candidate Shauna Marshall. First, a few words about the district and communities in it.
Minnesota Senate District 22 is made up of Lincoln, Pipestone, Murray, Rock, Nobles, and Cottonwood counties, and portions of Lyon, Redwood, and Jackson counties. Major cities include Worthington, Laverne, Pipestone, and Windham.
If you reside in this district, your questions will be given priority for the candidates' answers. All Minnesotans, regardless of residency, are encouraged to join this conversation. Our intention is to let our viewers gain an understanding of legislative priorities. Please direct your questions via the methods listed on the bottom of the screen. Now we'll meet tonight's candidates, and by a coin toss, the candidates have determined the order in which they will appear with their opening statement. And we'll open the statement. First opening statement will be with and from Senator Weber.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to visit with you this evening. I'm State Senator Bill Weber from Laverne. I'm a lifelong resident of Rock County, having grown up on the farm there and graduating from the Laverne High School. I went on to attend business college and came back to Laverne, where today I own Jensen Management Service Incorporated, a real estate brokerage, management, and appraisal firm. I'm married to Barb. We are the parents of Christina, who is married to Chris. Our son Will is married to Beth, and we are the grandparents of Isla, Emmy, and Liam. I have served 16 years in local government in Laverne as a councilman and mayor. And during that time, I began to realize the significant impact that state government has on our local communities, as well as everyone within that community, whether they're school children, whether they're nursing home residents, whether they're people receiving medical assistance. And I made a decision at some point that if I had the opportunity to go to St. Paul, I would go there to make sure that we could influence state government in a way that it could serve the needs of all Minnesotans better. And I have, in the past 8 years, served on various committees as a state senator. I currently chair the Agriculture, Rural Development, and Housing Policy Committee. I serve on the corresponding Finance Committee, Environment and Natural Resource Policy, and Finance Committees. It has been indeed a distinct pleasure for me to serve as your state senator during these past 8 years, and I look forward to being able to continue to serve you. We have a number of challenges that lie ahead of us with the shortfall that we are going to see within the budget as a result of the business shutdown. But it is my intention to go there to think thoughtfully and carefully about the way that we are going to need to address that issue to protect as many people and make the results as less severe as possible.
Thank you. And now the opening statement from DFL challenger Shauna Marshall.
Hello, everyone, and good evening. I'd like to first thank Pioneer PBS TV for hosting us tonight, and to thank all of the viewers who are watching and taking part in this. So I entered this race as it was a bit of a surprise to get the phone call that this was a possibility for me. It was not something that I had expected. But as I started to think about running, I began to think about my children. I am a mother to a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old, Julian and Avery. And as a mother, I have visions of the world and the environment and the communities that I want my children to grow up in. And so I was met with the thought that if I did not step up and act now, when given the opportunity to do so, then I would lose any right to then speak of the decisions that I want Minnesota to make going into the future and the environment that I would want my children to grow up in. So that became my motivating factor to join this race. So I grew up as a child of a single parent, and because of those experiences, I learned very early on the hard work and the grit and determination that it takes to move forward into a future that is unknown. And I used those skills to put myself through undergrad in psychology and graduate school clinical mental health. And I have been using those degrees to serve our community in the 5-district area for the last 7 years, which I have lived in Luverne. And in that capacity, I have gotten to speak with many different populations, our diverse populations in our district, and I've gotten to hear their struggles and their triumphs. And I look forward to serving those populations in the state legislature. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we start the questions, just a quick reminder to the viewers at home that you can learn how to register to vote in Minnesota and find your voting location on the Minnesota Secretary of State's website, mnvotes.org. Now we get started. As a reminder, the rules are that each question will be asked to both candidates. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to each question, and both candidates can offer a rebuttal of 1 minute if they so choose. We'll alternate which candidate gets asked each question first. So our first question goes first to Shauna, and it comes, as a matter of fact, from Curry. So do you support or would you author a bill to provide more funding to small cities for streets and highways? And the viewer notes townships and counties get funding, but cities under 500 no longer do. So there's the dilemma. Your response.
That's a very good question. I would definitely support working toward getting those cities under 500 population additional funding for their infrastructure. Those are towns where they don't have the tax revenue to be able to fulfill that themselves. And so I would like to see them get included in such funds such as the LGA grants, because that is the purpose of those funds for the communities that are tax poor, and is to go to infrastructure. So I do believe that those communities should have that same availability to those funds. I would also like to see those funds protected that go to the rural communities, especially those deep rural communities that so desperately need them. Thank you.
All right, same question for Senator Weber. Do you support or would you author a bill to provide more funding to small cities for streets and highways, noting townships and counties get funding, cities under 500 population do not?
Well, yes, I actually do support that. And actually it isn't all that long ago when cities under 5,000 didn't get any help from the state in terms of a lot of their streets. And I believe that it is important that all of our communities do receive that. And a lot of our rural communities do manage, especially even the smaller ones that are 500 or less, oftentimes do have a convenience store, they have a gas sale outlet in present. And if they're helping to generate that type of revenue, I believe that it is fair that they should also be entitled to receive some of the proceeds from the gas tax that is collected. Certainly it is getting more difficult all the time for a smaller community to manage to fund the necessary services that it needs to provide to its citizens. And at this point, a lot of times the smaller communities are reliant upon whatever the county can afford to put into a county road that may go through there or whatever. But it is important that we do make sure that they have the money they need to protect and develop those resources.
All right, any rebuttal there?
I
Not
would just-
mandatory, but go ahead.
Yeah. So I would just like to add that there are some communities that are within that under 500 population that don't have services such as gas stations, some not even the convenience stores. And so we do have to look at these alternate resources that we can help fund those communities as well that don't have any of those tax possibilities. So it is very important. I would agree with Senator Weber that we need to get assistance to those communities, but we're going to have to look at a variety of ways to do so.
Okay. On we go then to our next question that will go to Senator Weber. It comes to us from Pipestone. Thank you for joining us. The viewer notes that one of the things holding back economic development, particularly in rural Minnesota, is lack of quality housing. What is the state's role to help solve this dilemma?
Well, over the years, the state has put together a program whereby they use housing infrastructure bonds oftentimes to provide grants to communities for the construction of multifamily housing. And certainly we have a variety of housing needs in rural Minnesota. Some of it is housing for the elderly, some of it is affordable workforce housing, and some of it is affordable housing for those who may not have a job, but obviously still need a place to live. Unfortunately, over the course of years, a lot of the rules and regulations that the state has attached to these programs have raised the cost substantially. And what happens is that I've had communities within my district that have had to turn back these grant monies because they could not find a contractor that could build the units for the money, for the right price, that made it affordable for people to live there. And I think we have to be very careful about that. And that's one of the reasons in this last housing bill that I carried in the Senate, I actually had provided a provision in there that these housing infrastructure bonds could actually be used for single-family homes up to the point of $100,000. What this would do is it would allow more opportunity and for contractors, allow more contractors into the market to help build those homes and to help provide that type of housing for people. And unfortunately, the governor's office and the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency prevailed upon for the Democratic Party members of the Senate to all vote against that because they really didn't want that to happen. And we do need to have serious reforms within the rules and regulations by which the state provides its money for housing infrastructure.
All right, and the same question for Shauna. As we've noted, one of the things holding back economic development in rural Minnesota for sure is lack of housing. What is the state's role to solve this?
I think that's an excellent question, and thank you to whoever posted that. So the housing infrastructure bonds, they are increasingly important for our rural communities because as I've visited these communities, as I've talked to city government within these communities, it becomes very apparent that these are struggles that most of the communities within our district are facing. So we are short on multifamily housing, we are short on workforce housing, and these are all areas where they're needing to build. But as Senator Weber pointed out, building costs right now are fairly astronomical. And so then it's the question of how do we address that? And one of the struggles that is driving up those costs is lack of a workforce for those trades. And that is where we need to place a greater emphasis on getting people into our areas to work in those trades. And that will help bring some of that cost of building down. But yes, we need to protect those housing infrastructure bonds. We need to promote and assist our city governments in the projects that they are working on to build within their communities and to expand their communities. So within the state government, I would agree with Mr. Weber that we need to take another look at how we're allowing those funds to be utilized so that we can serve all of the population and all of the needs of the communities, and that we are working together to do so across the aisle. Party politics is not as important as making sure that we are serving the people of our communities.
All right, any rebuttal, Senator?
One of the other elements that we need to consider in the housing issue is the fact that we have many communities that have older houses that are in need of rehab. And we need a more robust program to help bring these houses into a better livable condition. When you stop and consider the cost of new construction nowadays, it can certainly be a much better and a more economical way to make our housing dollars go farther by going ahead and rehabbing some of these houses so that we aren't expending all these dollars for totally new construction all the time.
All right. And rebut?
Yes, thank you. So Senator Weber reminded me of a program that I've recently been talking to some of the city governments about, and that is joining in conjunction with some of the school departments to rebuild some of these aging homes within our communities, and doing it in a way that the students get to take part in that. And so that does cut down on labor costs, but it also teaches them those trades. They get to learn construction, they get to learn plumbing and electrical and just everything that goes into building those homes, and then that is a home that a family can then utilize and move into. So that is a great way to not only encourage trades within our students and then staying in the community and getting into those trades, but also rebuilding those homes in our communities.
All right, anything further? All right, thank you, candidates. On to our next question, which comes from Pipestone. What will you do as a candidate, and specifically when elected, what will you do to prevent further loss of beds in rural nursing homes? And that goes first to Shauna.
The loss of beds in our nursing homes has been an increasingly difficult struggle. I know that within this last year, several in our district have closed down, leading to those residents having to move to much further homes, away from their neighbors, away from their family, and everything that they've known. And that is a struggle, and that is a hardship on them. And so it is imperative that we find a way to correct that. And there are a multitude of avenues we can take to begin to correct it. So part of the problem, of course, is COVID-19. And the nursing home industry was hit drastically through that, through losing employees, through having to provide greater level of services for their residents that became a burden on them. And so what we can do is I believe providing and ensuring a livable wage for those employees so that they could bring in quality employees, make sure they have the training, and then retain those quality employees. Because unfortunately, that is also an industry where we so often see people come in, spend a few years, and then move on to other jobs. As a mental health provider, we see that same movement within our own industry. And so it is very difficult to retain employees in some of these industries, and I think providing that livable wage can do so. We also need to team up with the city governments and the local investors who are working toward rebuilding and revitalizing the nursing home industry. And there are many going on in our district right now. And if the state government can work in conjunction with those to get those beds reopened and available, then I fully support that.
All right, same question for Senator Weber. What will you do to prevent the further loss of beds in rural nursing homes?
The issue surrounding our nursing homes has been here for quite a few years. In the first 4 years that I was in the Senate, we had the nursing homes come to us because there were, quite frankly, a number of them in danger of shutting down. The regulatory burden that the state has placed on them many times is substantial, and it costs them additional money. While we all recognize that there's a need for regulation because we want our elderly to be safe, sometimes it's just overburdensome in terms of duplication of paperwork and this type of thing, and they wind up having to spend more hours taking care of the paperwork than they actually do taking care of the patients and the residents of the homes. And fortunately, Representative Schumacher had carried a bill that for the first time in decades greatly increased the amount of assistance to the nursing homes and provided an increase for the workers, provided an increase for the home itself to make their needed repairs, and et cetera. Certainly, COVID has brought a new realm of problems, and certainly we need to make sure that the nursing homes are covered they were part of the COVID care package that the legislature produced for additional funds, and certainly as we go forward from here. We do need to continue to look at that situation, evaluate perhaps new ways to provide that service, and certainly our elderly are one of our most precious commodities, quite frankly, out here in rural Minnesota. These are the folks that have raised us, that have taught us, and that have provided the value structures that we rely upon and that we carry out in our everyday lives.
All right. Any rebuttal? Yes.
So I commend Representative Schumacher for his work on working toward funding the nursing homes. And that is something that we will have to make sure that we are working continually on, especially as we go into the next legislative session, where we're going to have to make some hard budget decisions. With that being said, being in the mental health field myself, I very much understand the paperwork conundrum and how paperwork can so often pull providers away from the patient. But that is also usually required by insurance. And so that might be something that we need to look at working with the insurance companies on not requiring that level of paperwork so that we then can make sure that our elderly are getting the services they need. That's a whole nother issue that we'll have to look at.
All right. Senator, anything? All right. On we go to the next question, which will be first directed to Senator Weber. What is your position and your comments regarding more solar panels and wind turbines in the district?
Well, at one point here a few years ago, and I don't think it has changed, Senate District 22 was the home of the most wind towers of any Senate district in Minnesota. And you know, we have, and there have been some of them that have been decommissioned, some of the first ones that were installed, but there have been a number of new ones that were built as well. At that time, we had about 1,425 wind towers in the district, and certainly today it's going to be a few hundred more than that. I believe that we need a varied energy structure. We are not going to be able to rely solely on wind, solely on solar. We need to make sure that we have a full complement of energy available to Minnesota. And that's going to include oil products, that's going to include biofuels, that can include wind, it can include solar. We have to also recognize that many times, right now as we look at solar panels, we also need to be concerned, quite frankly, about the construction of them and about the type of materials that are necessary in order to build those panels. And we also have to recognize that it takes perhaps the most efficient manner of solar energy is when you do have a larger solar farm rather than even the small rooftop units that have been popular over the years. I do also hear from people, to be honest about it and to represent everyone, that quite frankly feel we have enough towers out there right now. I believe that the industry itself and the energy market itself will sort that out. And as we go forward, if there is a way to have dependable energy with more wind towers, that's fine. But at the end of the day, we must always make sure that our energy source is safe and dependable.
All right. And on we go. Anything to rebuttal?
Can I answer?
Oh, I'm sorry. All right. Here we go again. It's the moderator, not the candidates. All right. I'm sorry, Shawna.
That's okay.
Yes, your response.
Thank you. So yes, I would like to see our state of Minnesota continue to work toward utilizing clean energy. So this would be increasing our wind turbines, increasing our solar energy use. Now, of course, that does come down to the local communities. I know in our district we do have quite a few wind turbines, and I take great pride in driving past them and knowing that we are doing our part to promote clean energy in our district. So I would like to see that continued and to see our state move ever closer to being fully reliant on clean energy. Of course, that is a progression that's going to be over years of work. That will also open up a lot of other questions. We will have to re-educate some of the workers that are working on the pipelines and working in those fields. We'll have to re-educate them so that they can then move into some of the clean energy industries. And that is something that I would fully support creating programs to do. But it is something that I believe that we are moving toward, and we need to stay, as Minnesota, ahead of that curve and continue to be leaders in the clean energy movement.
All right, Senator, anything?
I would just mention that as we look at a full contingency of energy products, one of the things that concerns me today is the fact that within the Department of Commerce and within the MPCA, we do have people that look at ethanol and they look at biodiesel and they say, no, that's not clean enough. We mustn't support that anymore. And I think we in the rural areas need to be extremely concerned about that. We have a variety. There are 4 ethanol plants in this Senate district, and there is a biodiesel plant. And I would believe that that is great concern when representatives of the administration take that type of attitude.
All right, any rebuttal?
Yes, thank you. So I would agree with Senator Weber that the bioethanol industry is very vital and important within our district. So no, I don't support moving away from that. I would support exploring other avenues to utilize that resource, such as jet fuel. That's something that we're going to continue to need. So it is not a matter of abandoning that field entirely, but it's looking at how can we utilize it in different ways? How can we utilize it in ways that still serve our needs as we move forward into the future?
All right. Anything else, candidates? On we go. This question comes to us, community not mentioned. Nonetheless, valid question. And it's broad-based, but relevant. And this will go to Shauna first. What can we do as citizens, legislators, to make our communities more welcoming to newcomers?
That is an excellent question, and I think one that has become ever important in our current climate. And our district is a very diverse one. Within our Worthington School District alone, we have 49 different languages spoken. And so learning as a culture, as a society, how we can move toward welcoming our newcomers is becoming increasingly important. And I believe that we can do that through a whole plethora of means, both in the legislative world and just as community members. So that it requires us to take a look at our own biases and ask ourselves those kind of uncomfortable questions on how we individually can be more welcoming to new individuals in our community. And then within the school district, I think that is huge for our students of color to feel welcome, to see teachers that look like them, to have the support staff and the school counselors that help create that sense of belonging within the school environment. We also need to have programs within our communities that provide that welcoming and that belonging. And I'm sure we're going to get more questions about this, but there is a lot we can go into in this topic that we just simply don't have time for right now, but that is a very important question, and I do thank that viewer for asking it. And this is something we have to continue to work on, because it is vital to make sure that every member of our community feels that they belong there and that they contribute in a positive way to that community.
All right, and Senator Weber, same question for you. What can we do as society, local communities, to make our communities more welcoming to newcomers?
Certainly as our communities grow, as our businesses need additional workers, we have and we will continue to see a number of people that are coming into our community that have traveled from farther away in order to have an opportunity to have a better life. We as individuals certainly need to open up our hearts and minds to those people and to reach out to them and to welcome them into our communities. We know that many of them are there just like the rest of us, trying to earn a living, trying to raise their family, and certainly that is an honorable thing. And as we proceed, as we work out within the community, we look at the issues that present themselves, such as housing, such as the recreational opportunities available to them in local communities, look at the education system. I served in my first 4 years in the Senate, I served on the E12 Education Committee. We talked about the fact of having teachers that the students could relate to. English as a second language is a major issue in terms of our communities that do have a large immigrant population in them. And I think that we also need to understand that even within the testing methods of education, when we have a number of students that have come in that are in the process of learning English, that quite frankly, some of the tests that are given are not necessarily fair in all respects, and there should be some type of allowance for school districts to provide for that situation. But it's going to continue to be an issue as our businesses need employees and as we see more individuals immigrate to this country.
All right, thank you. And we go to the next question that will go to Senator Weber. What can be done by the state legislature to meet the growing need for mental health care in District 22?
You know, many of the issues surrounding mental health actually date back probably to sometime in the 80s when the state decided to basically get rid of the mental health centers that were around the state. Now, there were certainly issues that surrounded them in which treatment was not proper, in which there were problems. The unfortunate thing is that the state never took the next step. They never provided a resource for those facilities that were removed. Oftentimes what happened is that responsibility for mental health, particularly people that might have an emergency and a crisis situation, wound up getting placed on the backs of emergency rooms and hospitals and on law enforcement, neither one of which were trained to necessarily provide the type of assistance that that particular patient needed at that moment in time. A couple of years ago, the Senate bonding chair, Senator Sinjum, provided money in the bonding bill that started to set up small regional centers for those individuals who have a crisis situation to go to, that there would be trained personnel and that they could be taken care of in a way that they were not a danger to themselves or to others around them. The reality of it is that the issue of mental health is a complex problem. There are still certainly a number of misconceptions about it out there, but we do have to recognize that the people that are experiencing mental health problems are the same as those experiencing physical health problems. And as we go down this road, we do need to figure out a way to effectively provide services.
All right. Any rebuttal for that one?
Oh, yes. To answer.
Jonna?
I still need to answer the question.
Okay, what time is it? Okay, it's time to go home. Not quite. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. So as a mental health provider myself, I'm very familiar with the struggles that we experience within the field. So it was not just in the 80s, but even recently, in the last couple of years, we've had several facilities closed down across the state. And so this forces us, and these facilities that have closed down have been primarily for youth. So now we no longer have those beds. And so when we have youth who have an emergency situation, who are at risk for harming themselves or somebody else, We have to send them further and further away from their communities and their family members as we look for beds and facilities to place them in. So as a state legislator, I do believe that we need to look at refunding those facilities, getting some reopened so that we have places for this very vulnerable population. I also know that COVID-19 has hit this field pretty drastically in terms of funding. A lot of contracts were cut, a lot of funding was cut, and so that is something that at the state government level we can begin to assist with, because this is a service that provides for, as I said, the most vulnerable population. And as Senator Weber was talking about, without mental health services, then this falls on the police departments, it falls on the emergency rooms. And I agree, they're not trained or equipped to handle these situations. And that is why we do work in conjunction with those entities. So very often I am called into the ERs to do an assessment on a patient who has expressed risk for harming themselves. I've had situations where I've had to call in law enforcement to come with me into a dangerous situation, or they've called me to come in and help assess a person. So we are definitely working together, but this is always an area where we can use more assistance and more funding.
Senator, any? Okay. On we go, and that question will go first to Shauna. And this is the great big, you've got a wide open field, because the viewer from Hills, as a matter of fact, asked this question. What is the biggest problem facing Senate District 2 that the state legislature can do something about?
That is a very broad question. Oh, goodness. So, I know our agriculture is huge in our district, and it's huge in our state. Our population involved in agriculture is 4% of Minnesota's population, but makes up 20% of our GDP. So this is a huge area where we need to make sure we are serving their needs. And they've been struggling, especially this year, with COVID-19, with the breakdown in the supply chain. They need our assistance from the state government, from the state legislature, and I believe that there are all kinds of ways that we can begin to do that through passing the buffer strip tax credit, through passing the bonding bill with the Section 179 full conformity. These are areas where the state legislature can help this industry. In addition to that, we've also experienced throughout Minnesota the issue of racial disparity, and that being a very diverse district is something that we have to work on and encounter within our own district. Another big issue that I've encountered is just our local communities being able to continue to grow and thrive and build that quality of life. And that comes down to very small but important struggles, such as providing childcare, providing affordable housing, providing jobs, and having the workforce to work those jobs. So these are all areas that are critical to our thriving district. And these are areas where we can also make some impact through the state legislature.
All right, thank you. And Senator Weber, broad question. You've got the floor, if you will. What is the biggest problem facing Senate District 22 that the state legislature can do something about?
As we look at the issues that lie in front of us, I think one of the main problems that we've experienced in these past few months is the shutdown of business and the taking of power, quite frankly, by the executive branch in Minnesota. What we do need to be able to do is to get our businesses open as quickly as possible, safely, yes, but what we saw happen at the beginning of this situation was the fact that the big box stores were allowed to stay open. Our main streets got shut down. The reality of it is, most of our Main Street businesses would be delighted to have someone standing every 6 foot apart in their store, but people weren't even allowed to come in the door. So as we look that we are at risk of losing a substantial number of businesses due to the restrictions that are still out there and due to the restrictions that we have had in the past few months. We have a variety of issues that face us. Yes, the Section 179 tax conformity should have been done by now, but unfortunately, the governor opposed it 2 years ago, or last year, and it was not able to get done in the tax bill then. We have a variety of needs that are out here in rural Minnesota in our local communities in terms of water and wastewater treatment. At one point in my Senate career, as we looked at the top 40 communities that needed to have their wastewater plants redone, over 25% of them were in Senate District 22. And so it is important that we get the bonding bill done and we get the monies out to those communities that do need to redo their plants. Also, we're going to be looking at the budget shortfall, and that is going to be a major problem going into next year.
All right, a rebuttal, if you would, please.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, Senator Weber, but I believe there was some legislation regarding that conformity within our current bonding bill that is waiting to be voted on. That bonding bill would also provide some funds to our communities to address the water systems, the sewage systems, which they, I agree, so desperately need. And that is why we need to have the vote and pass that bonding bill, which unfortunately was not able to be accomplished yet. So yes, and I would also agree with Senator Weber that reopening our small businesses needs to happen in a safe way. And that is where I have a proposal for a tiered system of response for any future health emergencies, because we addressed this, and our governor addressed this crisis in the moment. And now we've learned from those decisions. We've learned where maybe we could have made different ones, and now we have to create a plan so that we can deal with this going forward into the future.
Senator, anything?
Well, the reality of it is the tax conformity issue will not be dealt with in the bonding bill. That's a tax bill issue, and it will not be part of the bonding bill. Now, there does need to be an agreement between the House and the Senate for both things to happen. And quite frankly, we have indicated our willingness to House leadership that we would be willing to pass the tax bill with the tax conformity in it. It has not happened. We actually took up a bonding bill in the Senate. Now, typically, the bonding bill has to originate in the House and come over. But as we got to the end of regular session, we put forth a bonding bill that dealt with the many issues that are out there. And quite frankly, our bonding chair thought he had the votes. But on the floor, while that bill was being debated, the governor's office and the minority leader was contacting and threatening their own members that they better not vote for that bill. So we're ready to pass that bill, and we'll do so as soon as it comes to us.
All right. And we're down to our final question. I'll direct it to Senator Weber. It's sort of a broad-based one again here, but is there a way, or how would you help to ensure that every Minnesotan has access to health care through insurance?
In the past couple of years, we have certainly set reforms in place in terms of reinsurance and health insurance that in many instances have reduced the premiums, which escalated substantially after the Affordable Care Act came into being. And so we need to continue to reform those elements and to ensure that health insurance is available at a reasonable price. We actually had at one point Minnesota Care, which quite frankly became a problem with the Affordable Care Act. And that was our way of making sure that people that couldn't get insurance anywhere else had an avenue by which they could get insurance. The reality of it is Affordable Care and MNsure has not really worked all that well. When it came into being, there were a number of snafus and there were extreme escalation of insurance premiums. And so we need to make sure that we have a variety of insurance plans available that ensures competition and produces a reasonable product at a reasonable price. Basically, there are some that wish to go to a single-payer system. A government-run health insurance program, quite frankly, is the same as rationed health care. The only way that they can control their costs is to cut down on the service that ultimately is provided. And if you go back to England, when they took on governmental health insurance, the first thing they did was reduce the wages of doctors and nurses because that's the only way they could control their costs. And so we need to work within the system we have to make the necessary reforms to ensure that all services are provided in the most economical manner possible.
Thank you, Senator. And to our challenger, if you will, how would you or could you ensure that every Minnesotan has access to affordable health care?
This is an excellent question and so important for our citizens within our district and the state. So there is hot debate over this issue, and the simple point is that we need to make sure that our people have access to health care. That is something that should not be a question, no matter what side of the aisle that we are on. The question is, how do we do that? And that can certainly be debated. But from my perspective, I believe that working toward making sure that everybody has access, even if it's a single-payer system, is the direction that we need to move toward. To jump to that as a state all at once is unrealistic. But we can start with expanding MNsure. We can start with expanding it to people who are working in small businesses who have to pay enormous premiums and simply can't afford it. We could expand it to farmers who have to buy into these same insurance programs with these enormous premiums. We could expand it to mental health. Within my field, I've seen clients come in who have private insurance, but have a $50 copay, and they can't afford paying $50 a week. And so they don't receive services that they so desperately need. So we have to be moving forward and making the steps to ensure that our people have access to the care that they need. And I believe that is through expanding these programs and making those small steps forward to ensuring people a little bit as we go, with the end goal being making sure everybody is insured and has access to health care.
I would like to be able to offer rebuttal time. However, our time is about up. So, well, I've just been corrected. Anything, Senator? Okay. Anything else? All right. On we go, as I have suggested. Okay. As we conclude the debate, each candidate will offer a 2-minute closing statement. If I've taken correct notes, and this evening, goodness only knows, we're going to start with Shauna. Is that correct? That's correct. All right. 2 minutes.
All right. Again, I would like to thank Pioneer PBS for hosting us, and for the viewers who have stuck through this conversation with us. Thank you for taking part in this and taking part in our democratic process. I'd also like to thank Senator Weber for joining me in this conversation. I would like to put it out there that Senator Weber has served our communities for many years, and that is respectable, and I thank him for that service. I don't always agree with the decisions that Senator Weber has made, but I do respect that service. So I believe that a campaign and a debate is to show you guys, our citizens who we will represent, the differences in our vision for the future. And my vision for the future is one where we are not having to be in a pandemic or a protest in order to stand beside one another and walk together and care about the health and the wholeness of our neighbor. That is a future that I think that Minnesota can accomplish, because that is who we are. At our core, we are people who work hard, who support our neighbors, and want to see the best for everyone. And I look forward to continuing that work with you. And that is why I'm asking for your vote on November 3rd. Thank you, and have a good evening.
Thank you. And now to the closing segment for Senator Bill Weber for 2 minutes.
Well, thank you. Thank you to Pioneer PBS. Thank you to those who are watching and to my opponent for being here. Certainly, over these past 8 years, I have become more convinced than ever that it is you, the people of Minnesota, Senate District 22, that make this state work. It is not government. Yes, government has an important role and function, but all too often, government becomes the important issue rather than the individual. As I have been in the legislature for these past 8 years, I have tried to focus on the needs of the individual. I have reached across to members on the other side of the aisle as I have carried legislation to bring back career vocational training to the high schools. I have worked with them on various joint conference committees as we have tried to iron out the final bill that would bring a compromise to which we could all agree and to which we could pass, whether it was a budget process or whether it was a policy bill. I will continue to do that. I have worked diligently with members on both sides of the aisle to achieve what I believe will make Minnesota better. And as we look forward into the next biennium, we are indeed faced with a serious situation in terms of the deficit, a deficit that has been made extremely problematic by the shutdown of business and by the fact that many of these businesses will not be able to come back. And as we look at the needs that Minnesota provides, whether it's for the person in the nursing home, whether it's for the student at school, whether it's for the person who receives medical assistance, whether it's for the immigrant that has just come here, whether it's for our farmers, our business people, we have indeed a great number of needs ahead of us. I intend to approach that with the same thoughtful process by which I have spent the last 8 years in the Minnesota Senate. I ask for your vote on November 3rd. Thank you, good night, and God bless.
Well, thank you, candidates. That now concludes our program. Thanks again to both of you for joining us, and special thanks to our viewers who sent along the questions. To watch this and other Meet the Candidates episodes, past or present, visit video.pioneer.org or the free PBS video app. Just choose Pioneer PBS as your local station. Thank you for joining us on Meet the Candidates.
Did we ever go back and live again?
I think we got